wrap up to this and we'll move on to some watch. I also updated the website, the Canvas site. Like I said, I shifted the tables around so that the most recent stuff is at the top. And we talked about that. As the class progresses and as those pages get more populated, it'll make it easier to find stuff, right? I know that I'm behind the 8 ball on getting something up for expressionism. That's the next thing we're getting to next week. I'll have that up soon, this afternoon, tomorrow morning, somewhere in there, right? Maybe Sunday. That's how these things work, right? Usually my Sundays are also working all day. So we were left off talking about the Sultan books. We were trying to trace Picasso and Braque on their way to Cubism, right? And with Picasso, we were looking at his blue period. This picture is his major transition out of that. It's, in fact, started as a blue period picture, painted over the top of it in sort of more pinkish tones, which will be the next phase of his career. And it's huge, and as such is intended by Picasso to be a saint of this sort. So we were looking at these two figures on the left. We were talking about the fact that they both come from the old Italian comedians, right? The Commedia dell'arte, which can be traced all the way back to the 17th century. And they always wore the same costumes no matter what play they would be in. But these plays are just farces, right? Meant to highlight the stupidity of human endeavor. You know, show how dumb we all can be when confronted with things like greed and love and whatnot, right? And so Picasso is in self-portrait and in the costume of Harlequin, and next to him is Apollinaire in costume as an unnamed jester. Both of them are the most comic of the Italian comic actors, right? Remember that Harlequin is the one who is the servant to the rich man in these plays, and is the one who sees behind the scenes, knows everybody's motivations, right? Is also smarter than anybody else on stage, which is exactly how Picasso likes to see himself, right? He's kind of cocky, right? And the jester comments also that he's much more of a buffoon, right? Much more silly. And since these are both Picasso in self-portrait and Apollinaire, we have to think that in addition to its statement on where he is in his career, right, out in the wilderness, on the edge of something new, we also should think of this as having a really strong autobiographical connotations. The possibility that Picasso is trying to tell us something about himself and his life at this point as well, right? So he and his friend are there. That should get us thinking. The woman in the lower right corner seems to be a fairly late addition to the composition. Originally that was empty, and he added her in. We know this because we've done x-rays on this, and we've seen there are about 3 or 4 layers leading up to the final layer, and we can see them, right, through x-ray. And she's not in the lower layers, where the rest of them are. And there are other little things, like the boy in blue had a dog next to him originally. It's cute. Why did he paint out a dog? But he did, right? And she isn't in part of it, so she's an important addition. And she's sitting next to this earthenware jug, this simple earthenware jug. And her costume suggests Spain. It seems to be a Spanish peasant's costume. And Picasso and his group are isolated from her. Now, if we think about that as a big metaphor, right? Picasso is, at this point in his career, now pretty firmly established in Paris. He's left Spain behind. So we can look at the woman in the corner as being this symbol for heritage that he's abandoned. At the same time, the little girl whose hand he holds is also in Spanish costume. And I think we can put these together when we look at Picasso's work. What we see is an attempt to do something new, an attempt to leave the past behind, but at the same time, his Spanish heritage remains sort of a strong element of his character and his ideas. So we think about the little girl also as, you know, that legacy that can grow. Whereas the older woman, not that much older, but older woman, is the past he's left behind, right? He's leaving part of it, but he's taking some of it with him, right? It's also interesting. Picasso had just started an affair with his landlady, and that's probably her in the corner, not the little girl, right? The woman in the corner as well. Now, if we look at Picasso's work around 1905, 1906, we find these circus performers, right? Because really that's kind of what they are in a way. What we often found saltimbanques on street corners, but often they would also appear in the circus after sort of, in a free-range circus sort of environment. Cirque du Soleil sort of thing, right? And these performers appear rather frequently in Picasso's works right around the middle of this first decade. We just see them everywhere. Here's a little Jumbo that looks very, very much like our acrobat with the barrel on his shoulder. We just sort of changed the arms around a little bit, right? This is a painting on cardboard. Lest you think that Picasso's only Cubist, he's a fantastic draftsman. He's just a his sense of solid three-dimensional form, usually achieved through just the wandering outline, right? There's a lot of shading, but it's the thickness of the line down by the knee that gives it its sense. It's phenomenal. It's such good drawing. And we forget that about Picasso, because we get caught up with the Cubist side of things, just how good he was as a realistic draftsman. One of the best that really ever walked. And it'll come back in his career from time to time. We will trace that later, right? Because he has such a long, he doesn't die until 1974 or something, right? He's around. When he died, Paul McCartney wrote a song about it. It's on Band on the Run. Randall Taylor died last night. Anyway, that's how long he's around, right? He outlived the Beatles. So there you are, all of these characters, there's another of the Justice looking again very, very much like Apollinaire from the Baltimore Museum of Art, another drawing on cardboard. Again with the young figure who looks again like our little younger acrobat as well. So there's essentially he's playing with a cast of characters in his pictures. And that he's both the actor and the theater director, isn't he? And I think that for those of you who like to make art, one of the things, again, I'm going to say this again and again, that one of the lessons of modern art is just because you've done an idea and you've done the work with it doesn't mean you're done with it yet. There's lots of ways to re-manipulate your thoughts around something and come up with a different kind of composition that uses some of the same ideas, but in a way that you didn't explore the first time around. So our picture, the song about family, doesn't really deal with sort of the issue of mentorship, the older performer protecting, but also perhaps training the younger, which is something that gets picked up in some of the other pictures, right? There are opportunities here that he sees that even though he's made a 7x7 painting of it, it's not where he's going to stop in investigating this. Right? Another self-portrait is Harlequin at one of the more famous of the dive bars on the Montmartre in Paris, the La Panagile. The frisky, not frisky, what do we call it? Agile. You know the word agile? You're sort of athletically inclined, right? You're coordinated. You have good poise. And sort of agile. Lapin is rabbit, so the agile rabbit, right? La Panagile. And there he is, dressed as Harlequin, drinking some absinthe, right, which is this hallucinogenic drink that was very, very popular up until about, around World War I, it was rendered illegal because it had wormwood in it, and it literally was hallucinogenic. It's legal, but they don't use wormwood anymore, right, because it's highly addictive as well. But yeah, you can buy absinthe now. They replaced it with pastis for all those years in between. But it's this bitter green drink. It's kind of wonderful, actually. But I've never had the earlier version, right? I've only had the street legal version these days. But here he is, right, hanging out at a bar next to what presumably is a prostitute, right? Guitar player in the background. All these things that will become strong themes within Cubist works as well, right? The guitar already. And again, this sense of the autobiography, right? Picasso sees himself as this wisecracking, itinerant performer, even when he's just hanging out at the bar, right? At the same time, it suggests other narratives about the possibility that this is an actor after his performance, the actor's life off stage, picked up by this. Again, the sort of the depressing element of early Picasso as well. Here's Harlequin on his deathbed, mourned by other performers. And again, it looks almost like Picasso, not as much as some of the other ones, but imagining himself sort of living this role from cradle to grave all the way through. So the Saltenbach family is for Picasso an incredibly important work, and we're very fortunate to have it. It's one of the 2 or 3 most important Picassos out there, really, insofar as signaling a point in his career when things are going to change from one direction to the next. And what it does is it signals, it ushers in a period that we now call the Rose period, because his tonality has changed from that blue to overall pink tonality. And for the next 2 years is all, 1905, 1906, into early 1907, he does pictures that are primarily pink in tonality, pinkish orange, right? And again, I spend a long time looking at this picture because it's so well drawn. It's just so well drawn. Little things that give everybody trouble, like how does the ankle work? The toes are fantastic, aren't they? But also the complexity of the pose on the left is just phenomenal. But you know that whole idea that where your heel comes off of the arch of your foot is really kind of hard to draw, right? And it's a complicated bit of human machinery, right? But God, he just nails it. He makes it look as if it's just as simple as could possibly be. The proportions are also just spot on, right? And again, I think what makes these works really wonderful is the expressionlessness of the faces that seem to sort of stare into infinity, stare beyond the frame into something else that is dreamlike and imaginary. And that kind of brings that feeling to you, the viewer. And I think in some places, most places, he's intending this entirely. The other thing about Picasso, of course, I think he's really showing off. And by the way, these are roughly life size, right? It's about a 5-6 foot tall picture on the left as well. It's big, right? But he's showing off as well because to compose in a limited palette is a very, very difficult exercise. If you've ever taken color theory or classes like that, where they say, okay, you get purple, and that's what you got to do. That's all you're going to get. It's purple plus black and white. It's not easy to pull off, but it's even harder to pull off when that color would really muck up if you added black to it. Anything in the yellow range, right, just changes and gets ugly really quick. And Picasso is working primarily with just ranges of that tone without adding black, right? Adding browns, adding reds, and whatnot. That allowed. And then if you look at the standing here on the right, you see how little of it is modeled. There's nothing to his chest, is there? Right? There's a little bit in the abdomen, you can see, right? There's some modeling there to suggest the abdominal muscle right above his crotch. But if you go to his chest, there's nothing. And yet the sense of three-dimensionality is there because if you look at the way the lines of the arms get, how this wanders, that calligraphic line, that varying of thick and thin, is what makes the figure seem round. And it's not fitting in the places that you would imagine it should. Usually your artists will make it thicken when it comes in, like right here. And it's not here, it works. And it's set in the space. So, I recommend anybody study early Picasso. He is such an amazing craftsman. He's so good. Does so little with so much. Now, what made him go rose? Period. This is something we don't know again. But like Matisse, what we find with Picasso is that he is engaged with in a dialogue with earlier art. Very, very important for him, his place in the development of art. So the Saltenbach on the right is actually based, I should have brought it in, it's based on a Manet picture that's actually in the National Gallery of wandering street performers, the old musician. His Rose period stuff seems to go back further. And this may be from a dialogue with Matisse. They knew each other. This idea of figures that are picked out entirely in red and pretty much rendered only with outline. goes back to old Greek red figure vase painting from around 500 BC. Classical or late archaic Greek vase painting. And some of you know these fairly well. I've seen quite a few of them. Right? I just brought this one because it's a really good example. It's not from our local collection, although we do have some. But this one gives us now two nude figures in the against the sort of plain background, which gives us a good analogy for where Picasso is with this. So, again, very, very much interested in sort of his place in the history of art, and reviving older styles and bringing them into something modern. And again, this is he has this relationship with Matisse. They're not good friends or anything, but they know each other. They know each other well, and they know each other's work even better, right? So there's every chance that his interest in ancient Mediterranean art was in fact inspired by Matisse's earlier interest in exactly the same thing. And there is, in fact, a long-standing sort of back and forth between the two of them, really throughout their entire career. As we saw, Matisse lived to the mid-50s, Picasso to the 70s. So this dialogue continues even in the 20s and 30s and 40s, a back and forth between the two of them. Right? Even though they couldn't really be more different in temperament. In fact, many people suggest that Picasso's most famous work from the first decade, the Demoiselles d'Avignon, the Young Ladies of Avignon, was his response to The Joy of Life. A bunch of women that meet his ideals and standards arranged in an idealized environment with some references to ancient art. The three women on the left, their faces based on old Spanish masks, old Spanish heads, carved stone heads. The two on the right, African art, tribal art that Picasso had seen, that actually Matisse had been collecting and had introduced Picasso to. So again, this dynamic back and forth between the two of them as a strong sort of theme. There was a big show in Paris, probably 10 years ago now, maybe 12, on Picasso and Matisse, and this sort of wonderful back and forth between the two of them. For the Young Ladies of Avignon, also equally huge. We've been talking about these very large pictures, right? And how when we see something on that scale, we should stop and consider why the artist made it so big. And the Young Ladies of Avignon is roughly 8 feet on a side, right? It's up in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, right? That's roughly 8 feet square. So the figures are larger than life size. And it too, like I said, is encapsulating the past, but it's also encapsulating his past. It's sort of tying it up. I'm done with this stuff now. I'm moving on. So it's equal part blue period and rose period, right? Blue period background, rose period figures. But now pushing that in a brand new direction, which is often called the first Cubist picture. Because in it, he makes the background as solid as the figures. He flattens out the canvas in a way. Right? There is no foreground background anymore. They all end up kind of on the same plane. He also plays with the idea of multiple viewpoints. The woman on the right corner exposing herself into the picture, but her head turned entirely around. The second figure from the left here, if you look at the way her legs are crossed, she's obviously meant to be laying down. So if you look at that leg like this, you don't stand like that, right? She's laying down, but we see her tipped up. So it's this idea of multiple viewpoints as well. Right? The denial of the tradition that was learned since the Renaissance of one-point perspective, where you see everything from a single point of view. He's allowing you, the viewer, and your experience to be part of the picture. You see it from this way, and then you look down and you see it from that way. And it all comes together within the canvas. Now there's about a 10-minute thing online I put up on this, right? So you can cover more there, find out about the masks, find out more about the dialogue with Matisse, its place within the The development of Cubism is all available on the link online. Yeah, well, that's explained online, but yes. So what happened originally, in brief, right? Originally, Picasso's conception for this picture, and like our Saltenberg's picture, we have a lot of prep because he's not going to dive into an 8-foot picture, right, without figuring it out first. So he does a bunch of preparatory drawings, and some of them very large, for individual figures within this and sort of mapping out what the whole theme is. And one of the early drawings clarifies for us exactly what this is, which is a prostitute. And one of the early drawings has a guy, older man, carrying a book. And a younger man, in some of the drawings, he's wearing a little sailor jacket, right? And it's the French tradition, this was an old French tradition, of taking your nephew to a house of prostitution to become a man, right? And so the guy with the book has got the book because he's going to go read while the son's upstairs. And the women are posing for the kid, who's seated in the middle of them. So the woman who's got her butt toward us is actually posing toward the boy, and he'd be sort of like here, right? And as he works the composition through, he gets rid of that. Right? He wants to open up it, and in many ways, by getting rid of it, you become the little boy. You're the one they're posing for, right? And like with the Saltenbergs, originally in one of the studies in the background, there are horses running. So you see the rest of the circus. And in working out, it gets rid of it, and that opens up the meaning to multiple interpretations. Right? So he's making it more complex by making it simpler. Does that make sense? Right? Getting rid of the direct references. And he's done that here as well. Right? So what happened in the original, this goes back to you. Now I'm going to answer your question. Right? The hand up there, she's pushing the curtain aside to show them the ladies working that night. Right? So this figure here is pushing back a curtain, and so is this one, but it has become much more bundled. Right? The arm goes up to disappear. But this is the other curtain being pushed aside. Again, theater, right? Pushed aside to display it for us. Okay, so that's what that hand is up there, that disembodied hand. But remember, for Picasso, he's fragmenting and reconstructing. And that's why it seems disembodied from the figure and kind of out of place, and there's really no connection between that hand and the woman in profile. Right? There's no place where it articulates to her shoulder, because that wasn't part of the composition, even though it was part of what he sees. Is it making that clear? Right? Because again, the composition is one thing, and representation is something else. Right? And what we saw with Cubism is this idea of fragmenting and then composing. And the composition does not have to adhere to what you saw in the first place, although it will make reference to it. Right? Again, it was Matisse who was collecting the African sculptures and who certainly got Picasso involved in these, right? And this is probably where you can see it. The two of them had patrons that they both were selling to. One of them was the famous Gertrude Stein autobiography of Alice Toklas. Was a major collector, American, living in Paris with her brother Leo. And they were huge patrons of modern art, and they hosted these gatherings every Saturday. Oh, to be a fly on the wall, right? Every Saturday they'd have all their artist friends over, and their studio was just chock-a-block with pictures. And they owned The Joy of Life, was one of their pictures, right? They owned our Picasso Blue Period, a little girl with her hand out like this. And they'd have the artists go over, and they just would spend the evening drinking and talking about art on Saturdays, right? This is where Picasso and Matisse would exchange ideas with many others as well. Again, one of these sort of fantastic periods in the history of art, right? But it was Matisse who'd been collecting African art already well before Picasso learned it. Picasso hated admitting to this sort of stuff, that he might have gotten it from somebody else, right? But really, it's Matisse's interest that influenced Picasso in this. Now, our last thing is we're sort of building up the Cubism. What was Braque doing? Okay, so this is what Picasso was doing as he got up to the point where he's right at the edge of Cubism here, where he's really beginning to figure it out. Braque, for his money, prior to being a Cubism, what was he? What would you call him? Impressionist, or even closer, a Fauvist, exactly. Totally the Fauve artist, right? And he was in fact part of the Fauve exhibition in 1907, which is about the year they start to fragment, right? So he's not one of the original group of six that exhibited with Matisse in 1905. But that group wasn't, again, they didn't have membership, they didn't ask to join, right? But people picked up on this, and Braque is one of them. So around 1906, 1907, Braque's work is firmly Fauvist. So here, La Ciotat is outside of Marseille, on the Mediterranean. There's a major industrial port and a smaller, older fishing port, and they're separated by a little spit of land, right? So in the background, on the foreground, you see the smaller fishing port crowded with old school boats, right? And they are brightly painted. If you go to the Mediterranean, actually, I was in La Ciotat this summer. Had a beer just off that green boat, go that way about 20 yards. There's this nice little cafe right there. Karen and I had a beer there. Okay, we had two. But there's a nice cute little port, you can still see it, and there's a spit of land that comes down, and on the other side is the big industrial port. It's newer. And as you can see, beyond that orange roofed house, you see the smokestacks of the big ocean liners, right? So it's this play of new and old, which is a common theme in harbor scenes, going all the way back to Monet, right? So this is where Braque was at the time. By 1909, Braque is firmly in the Cubist camp, so he makes this more. And what is it that changes Braque's outlook, his approach to painting? It changed in 1908. Part of it came from the big retrospective of Cézanne that happened when he died, 1906. Started to open people's eyes. While Picasso is working on The Young Ladies of Avignon, Braque visits his studio, sees Picasso in his new direction, and understands there's something going on here that's a lot of potential, and begins to shift away from Fauvism to take what Picasso had started and push it to the next limit. And that is exactly how their relationship works from this point forward. They take it from one person's idea, the other one will take it and push it. And when they reach what they think is the limit, the other one will see that limit and go, I see the next step. I see where we should go from here. Right? So what Braque saw was the forms that Picasso was building, and he sees the next step. Let's get rid of some of the color so that we can focus on those forms more strongly. Now the colors he winds up with, these greens and yellows, we can trace back to Cézanne. He did a series of pictures of a quarry, a rock quarry, where that's exactly where that's coming from. But it becomes more fragmented, right? More of the background comes closer into the foreground falls deeper into the background. It becomes a little bit more difficult to read, but still maintains those references. This is exactly the kind of relationship we have. Right? Now what do I have? Oh, right, okay. He tries to show these works with Matisse. He takes them to Matisse. He says, "This is my new stuff." And Matisse rejects them. He says, "No, I don't want this stuff with ours. You know, we're all about color. You're not anymore." And he says, "I don't like these. They're filled with little cubes." So Matisse is like one of the first to sort of use that term that gives us cubism. Now, Matisse's term was picked up later by a journalist named Louis Vaucel, who put it into print, reviewing the show, calling it, Matisse calls it Le Petit Cube, right? And then it's Vaucel that says, oh, cubisme, right? Cubist pictures, making a direct quote from Matisse and then getting credited for coming up with the ism term, right? So from both of those, it was considered to be a negative criticism when Matisse said it. Matisse didn't like this stuff at all. There's a great story that when he saw the Demoiselle d'Avignon for the first time, that he just walked in and started laughing, right? And then other stages came in and hated it, but I kind of like the idea that he came in. Oh, really? Right? Because it's so different from where he this is, roughly the time that Matisse is starting to do things that are leading up to the dance. It's very, very different in spirit, right? So, what's interesting about Vaucel is this art critic, who takes Matisse's term, the little cubes, and comes up with cubism. He's also the critic who coined the term fauvism. It was his review of Matisse's show that gave us fauvism as well. So he's an art critic who's partly responsible for two of our, sorry? He's an art critic working for Vaucel, lower left corner, lower right corner on the screen. At this point, then, when Picasso and Braque are starting to work in a similar direction, an art dealer, David Henry Carweiler, decides that the two of them ought to share a studio. Right? And he sets them up in 1909 together in one studio that they share. And this begins that thing that Picasso called a marriage, that Braque called a mountain climb. From this point forward. So this is how they got there, right? Braque came from a very different tradition than Picasso did. Both of them came from a tradition that was very, very strong in color, and then abandoned it to pursue analytic cubism, only to re-inject it later on scene Juan Gris. And as we'll see next, some other artists as well. Right? So now we've looked at cubism, we've looked at how we got to cubism with Picasso and Braque. What I want to look at next is what people take from it. Right? It's just, as I mentioned before, cubism is very, very influential as a movement. And almost immediately in 1911, 1912, as Picasso and Braque are going in this direction, as we've seen in both of these, other artists see it and understand that this is a revolution in painting. This is different than anything that anybody had ever really done before. And begin to think about things they might do with this style. And so we're going to look at a couple of these offshoots. There was a group of artists in the suburbs of Paris, in a suburb called Puteaux, again here on the screen, right? Became known as the Puteaux group. A group of artists working in the suburbs, gathering together in Puteaux, who are very much influenced by Cubism, but are pushing in a new direction. We'll discuss that, right? One of them is Jacques Villon. The LL is like a Y, right? Villon. Jacques Villon. And this group of artists exploring color within Cubism, it's still referential to the machine shop. Can you read that okay? Can you understand the machine shop here? Imagine a big industrial sort of place where they bend metal. Right? And you've got those big cast iron steel machines that are painted green, right? They have this really heavy foot because the machine is doing these things, turbines spinning, right? An old industrial turn of the century machine shop. Gosh, it could almost be a textile shop, couldn't it? In a way, with the things from the loom arms of an industrial textile shop. Right? So it's not non-representational. Right? We see the neon lights up above, hanging from the ceiling. We see the crossbars of this industrial factory here. We see some of the machinery here. Other elements that are a little bit harder to read, this red ball here. That's exactly what this is. Other than a compositional element that here is this edge of the turbine or something. But nonetheless, still very cubist in nature. Right? Fragmented, angular, the background becoming slightly more solid, although not as much as Picasso and Braque. And certainly with significantly more color than either of them, and even in advance of Juan Gris. Right? A very, very colorful movement. In 1912, this group that's working in the suburbs in Puteaux mount a show together that they themselves organize. And they title the show, again, salon is the old term for art show, right, going back to the Royal Academy. The salon of the golden section, the salon de la section d'or, in Paris in 1912. The golden section salon. And that title, we'll see, is incredibly important for them. Does anyone know what the golden section is? What do we mean when we talk about a golden section? The golden mean? The golden section? No? It's from geometry, from mathematics and geometry. It's the idea of a perfect rectangle, right? Where the rectangle is made of a square plus half of the square. Okay? So each of the rectangles here is a golden section. Okay? So if you take this golden section rectangle and you cut off half of it, then cut off half of that, you get this one, this is perfect as well. Cut off half of that, you get this one is perfect as well. Right? So each of these rectangles is a perfect rectangle. A golden section. And there's, for some reason, this harmony of the golden section is something that is intrinsically and unquestionably appealing as an aesthetic principle. It's also somewhat mysterious because once you know what it is, you find out that actually it occurs in nature. And this is probably why it's so appealing aesthetically. And it is everywhere. And the way that it's everywhere is that what happens if you trace an arc between the corners of this. I meant to bring a pen in because there's one in here. There's a mathematician in the 16th century named Fibonacci, 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 who came up with a sequence, the Fibonacci sequence, which is 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Where this is the first number, 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. 2 plus 3 is 5. 3 plus 5 is 8. 5 plus 8 is 13. 13 plus 8 is 21. Right? And that actually will give us that same form. Right? That you see in C-sharp. Right? That you see when you trace. I've got it here, right? When you trace the arc around it, that becomes this sort of perfect, and we find it to be everywhere. And as soon as you know it, you start to look at things. It's like, oh my God, there's something that you don't have to be religious to say there's something there. Weird one, right? There's this great movie called, it was the first movie by Darren Aronofsky, who did Black Swan, and it was called Pi. It was about a guy that figures out the mathematical underpinnings to everything in the world. And people realize he's figured it out and they're going to try and kill him. And he thinks that the mathematical sequence is actually the name of God in numbers. It's a great film. It's really cool. And he thinks it's stuck in his head, and then by the end he takes a drill to his head to get it out. It's not shown off camera, so it's not as bad as all of that. But yeah, it's everywhere, right? It's the universe. Galaxies follow that pattern. It is everywhere, from big things, right? Hurricanes follow that pattern. Right? The Fibonacci sequence is everywhere. As you said, it's seashells, right? This is it. It's the golden section is everywhere. And this is why these artists now begin to sort of, and I tried this, I sort of think this works, you know? That there's something to the way the composition is laid out that you start to see it. And you start to see it sort of in all these different places. And that's why they're calling themselves this. And the reason is that they want their art, this is what separates them from the cosmic art. They want to make an art that addresses universal harmony. Right? They want to make an art that will take us from the world around us that we might see and transport us to something we haven't noticed yet. That is some sort of universal mystery that ties everything together. Right? Something metaphysical, something bigger than you and me. Which, for me, I think is I don't know, when I think about that as a way of making art, something lights up inside. I think that's not a bad thing. And if you think about an art that tries to get us away from the day-to-day and toward something else that's wonderful and mysterious and binds everything together. Right? We're not that far away from Matisse and his easy armchair, you know? But we are, because it's not the subject matter so much as how they depict it, as the composition. Right? For Matisse, it was a bit of both. Right? The subject matter, kids playing checkers, has everything to do with this. Right? But for here, in fact, the subject matter is almost antithetical to that. A machine shop, where you can hear it. You know, the big industrial sounds clanging and whirring, and you got to wear earplugs. This is not a place where you expect to find universal harmony. But it is. Right? And maybe that's the point. That it's not just everywhere where you might expect to see it, like in a seashell. You know, in a lovely landscape somewhere. It's in the places where you don't expect to see it, like in a noisy industrial machine shop. How better to tell us that it's everywhere than to show us a place where we wouldn't expect to see it. So this is the Puteaux group, right? The Golden Section group. Juan Gris was part of this as well. When he came to Paris, he was with Picasso and Braque, but he was also out working with the Puteaux group. And I started to look at this, I started to wonder if we do some tracing here. Sort of just begin to think about, you know, the Fibonacci problem. Holding together the placement of some of the objects as they exist. And it kind of makes sense because it opens up out of the bottom and then swings together into sort of a vortex around this circle above. And it begins to explain maybe why that thought is there. He says it has to bring the harmony of the golden section into his pictures. So, again, very close to Cubism, but moving in a new direction. Color becomes important. This precise measurement that's necessary to lay things out like this is also important. And I think if we think about the idea of precision, measurement, mathematics, right, applied to craft, then the machine shop also starts to make sense as a theme. Because machine shops really are about mathematics and precision. Right? Custom die-cut objects have to be very precise. Right? What comes out of a machine shop? Multiples of things, right? Bolts and nuts. Well, if they're not precise, they don't fit together anymore. They're useless. Right? This is a great place to look for very precisely measured things. So as such, it's a great theme for Villon to have taken on as a golden section artist. Okay. So, it's this group. It's not just Juan Gris, although he's important. It's this golden section group that actually plays a hand in Picasso and Braque bringing color back into their works. They see it as a place within Cubism because of the golden section group. Now, back to Apollinaire. Remember, he's the fat man in the Saltimbanques, right? He was an art critic as well. He was also a poet, friends with Picasso, and an early champion of Cubism. Right? Writing in the press, singing the praises of Cubism in all of its different forms. And he wrote a review of the 1912 Golden Section exhibition. And in that review, talking about how great the works were, how they move us away from the physical world to the spiritual realm, right, through these suggestions. He coined a term for them, an ism, that they liked and adopted. And this is orphism, is what Apollinaire called this golden section offshoot, right? So in the literature, you'll find them referred to three different ways. There's the Puteaux group, there's the artist of the golden section, of the section d'or, and they're orphism. Right? And the orphis term was not one they invented, but was brought up by the poet Apollinaire. Any idea where the term comes from? Anybody look at that? What does orphism refer to? Or can you tell from just looking at the word? Orph. Keeping in mind that Apollinaire is a poet. It's a name, actually. It refers to a name from literature. Orph. Ever heard of Orpheus? From ancient literature, the myth of Orpheus? Do you know the story of Orpheus at all? You do? Lena?
So Orpheus had a wife that died, and so she goes to Hades. He loves her so much that he goes to Hades to pull her back to Earth when he looks around. She like really catches that to keep her, he can't look at her until they're out.
Right. So the interesting part is that not only, okay, one, his wife, Eurydice, right, dies and goes to hell, and he thinks he can save her. So he actually goes into Hades, into the underworld, right, to bring her back, okay, out of true love. So his love transcends the physical world. It allows him to move between our physical existence and the supernatural, and then back again, right? That's part of the reason Apollinaire coins this, is that their art is intended to move us from the physical frame to something that suggests a broader metaphysical harmony. You know, the term metaphysics, right? Meta means above, right? So metaphysics is the thing that's supernatural, right? They mean they have to say meta, super, physics, natural, right? Metaphysics, supernatural. Something above our normal existence, right? So their work performs the same function as Orpheus, right? So that's one of the reasons that Apollinaire coined the term Orphism for the two pictures, or painters. The other reason is that the other part of Orpheus' legend, you know how to pick the other class that you can. This is the reward for chiming in. It actually is real. What did Orpheus do?
He kept begging him to look at her, saying that he didn't love her enough, and so he finally.
Stupid because it's all, right?
Yep.
Ruined it for us.
He looked, and then she stepped in, so he was told to take him back to Hades.
And he's long forever. Okay, that's excellent. Thank you. That's the question. The question that they asked was, what did he do for a living before he went to the underworld? He's a musician, a shepherd, right? Right, he's a musician. And by legend, he's such a good musician that when he plays his musical instrument, lyre, right, singing it like a guitar. Like a guitar, interesting, right? When he plays his lyre, he plays it so well that animals, wild animals are tamed, right? His song tames nature, right? So, and it's the basis for other legends, right? Like King David is often seen in a very similar light as playing for the animals, right? So Orpheus, maybe they just thought, no, it's speculative. The old machine shop is about Pharaoh. This is the picture that's trying to paint Pharaoh. Why did you choose a machine shop? Because it's not a quiet place, right? And the colors and the shapes, the diagonals and the swirls are meant to evoke not only how it looks, but how it sounds. And at the same time, finding the harmony that lays behind that. You get it now? So Orphism has a sort of a two-pronged reference. One is this idea of metaphysics, supernatural. The other is the connection to sound, harmony in a sonar way rather than just a visual way. And what we'll see with all of these sections or artists, these golden sections that go through these workspaces, is that they are painting sound, or at least they're attempting to paint sound. Right? Gives a visual analogy of a pyramid. And they don't do anything so stupid or simple not that easy, right? Or John Van Eyck is emerging words coming out of her mouth. It's not simple as that. It's evoking sound. I'm trying to understand. So who do you guys hand it?
I was just remembering that. I think because what you said was that Orpheus, like, the music changes nature, and I think I remember in one of the versions that I read it, that his music was actually the one that opened up, like, the earth to go with him.
Oh, really? So it becomes I didn't know that part. That's really fascinating, but the music itself is the passageway to the supernatural realm. That makes it even better, doesn't it? Because their art then becomes that same sort of passageway, right? By evoking sound, right? So we'll see as we look at the rest of these orphans that they're using compositions and colors in a sort of cubist fashion in a way that's meant to evoke sound. Okay? And the idea is that for many people, music was a purer art form anyway, right? That's how we talked about that before, I think. We talked about the fact that music was seen in the early 20th century as being one of the purest forms of art because it didn't have narrative, it wasn't representational, it was purely aesthetic, right? It appealed to your senses alone. That's one of the ways people looked at it. Yeah, Lena.
How do you kind of like compare that to like ballet, where the ballet generally has a storyline?
Well, since I don't do ballet history, so I can't. But I think, I think what I would think about is that, in fact, increasingly, both ballet, and it's right at this time, right? Yeah. That ballet is starting to become less representative. Think about the Rites of Spring, right? It's 1912, isn't it? 1912, 1913, it's right in there somewhere. I said I didn't do this stuff. I don't normally do this stuff. But right, so you know the Rite of Spring, you guys all know this work of symphonic music that was seen as being utterly ridiculous because it was so much just sort of pure sound, right? And was there a ballet that was that as well? Yeah. Right, so... Right. Yeah, and then Disney used it for the dinosaurs in Fantasia, 1914, right? If you've ever seen that Fantasia, right? That's how, and honestly, my references for a lot of high art outside of painting is always just like pop culture stuff, right? I know that because it reminds me of a punk rock song or a movie I saw once or something like that. But, so if you haven't seen Fantasia, it's actually pretty cool, right? So, yeah, so thank you, Lena, for that help. Right, here's a nice close-up of this, and you can see that in many ways, everywhere we look, he's translating into pure color, right? There's very little black here, and the colors that we do see are incredibly rich, and they glare at us, and they're applied in a way that's supposed to make us begin to think about sound, about movement. And with the idea of movement, one of the interesting things about the Puto group, about Orphism in general, is that it attacks the idea of movement in a different way. For Picasso and Braque, right, movement was an important part, right? It was getting away from the idea of the fixed perspective, right? The old Renaissance idea of one point perspective. And the way that they broke with that was to make works of art that gave you the viewer the opportunity to move around something. But any movement that was contained within a cubist work of art is your movement as a viewer, not the object is still life, right? Or a figure's portrait or a nude woman. The things don't move, you move. With the Puto group, things move. And they capture time, just as Picasso Braque did. But they do it in a different way. They allow time to elapse so that the things that you're seeing here started to move. So the swirling that you see here in the detail on the right is meant to be the objects within this machine shop at work. And some of the repetition and doubling of some of the vertical and diagonal elements that you see up above, those strong over on the left, right? Those are the idea that it's moving in space. And as time elapses, you see it at a different place. But you're still staying still. Right? So similar but different to what the Cubists have done. The reason I'm saying this, I know the next work was coming up was Albert Gleitz, who was another member of the Orphists, the Puto group. image of football players, certainly meant to be seen as entirely modern. They're actually rugby players, and rugby was a brand new sport in 1912. It only been around for a bit. And in fact, France had just won the first rugby in the Olympics. So they were like very proud about rugby. But we see the figures now moving. The rugby players moving forward. And we see the figures in the stands, and I guess there would be a simple way of putting words like in the comic book and putting here I don't know where the comics are coming. But you start to get things that look like words up here, but they're not, right? Like O's, F's, and E's. And this is the crowd looking down at the rugby game. And here are the rugby players moving toward us, and as they do, they're squashing flowers. So again, it's this idea of chaos and noise and violence, right? This is not, I'm not a big sports fan, so forgive me if this offends anybody. But rugby is a violent sport, isn't it? I mean, you're dragging each other around. You gotta, what's the old adage? You gotta have leather balls in rugby. Then you find these kind of bumper stickers. It's just a tough sport, right? It's really, you can get hurt. And the guys that play rugby don't like Russell Crowe. It's just big, burly guys, right? And so it's not like like, a nice, simple sport where people play it just, that's not the case with rugby. And Gleis is focusing on that sort of hand-to-hand combat. It's a violent sport. And yet within the violence, then, we find that the point is trying to look at the violence and see if there's some harmony, universal harmony, even here. Right? So, again, I can start to look at this. I look at the ball that the man in blue is carrying, and I start to see these Fibonacci swirls coming out of that, and taking the away from the other form. Using cubism to see within nature the harmony, a metaphysical harmony that is otherwise unapparent. Through the sound of the crowd, through the clashing of the body, through the grunting and the sweating and the smashing of the football players, we end up with a picture that's aiming for using color of composition to suggest something more harmonious. Right? This is really part and parcel of this Orpheus group, the golden section group. Right, again, Orpheus, I don't know why that's coming up again. I should have just stated, I think it's just animated from the previous slide. I just recently found up at the Baltimore Museum of Art, I forgot I had the slides. I have nothing to say about it other than bringing it. But it's sound and noise. It's kind of a cute little picture. Circus theme. Okay, so let's make it out, right? There's a big elephant in the middle, right? There's some acrobats floating around. But everywhere we look, we start to see these compositional arrangements that begin to suggest again and again the golden section as a compositional element. Adding into it. And again, this group is paralleling cubism, right? They're running alongside them. And they consider themselves to be cubists of the sort. And so we can see what Albert Gleis said. He's done what the cubists have done. He's moved from analytical cubism stuff on the right to synthetic cubism stuff on the left. Because they remain so much in step with cubists. This was actually in the Golden Section exhibition in 1912. It's in the National Gallery now, but it was there then. Again, figures moving. It's a procession of nuns that Picabia saw on his honeymoon. He's a Frenchman, even though his name looks Italian or even Spanish. But he's gone on his honeymoon to Sevilla in Spain, saw a procession of nuns, and that's what is the basis of this. Again, the moving object rather than the moving viewer across this landscape, but rendered in a very cubist fashion, where foreground and background intermingle, but obviously with increased amount of color. Picabia has an amazing career, and we'll look more at him, because he moves to New York and becomes part of the Dada movement. There was just a big retrospective of his works at MoMA just like last year. And It used as a title one of my favorite quotes from anybody, really, of his. Our heads are round, so our ideas can change direction. I like that idea. Right? And he morphs very, very quickly. But he's also part of the Foucault group, part of the Golden section group, and this is actually in the exhibition. Again, it highlights the degree to which all of these artists are using moving subjects rather than still lifes, rather than posed models as the subject for their works, because again, they're approaching the fourth dimension, time, in a very different way. Probably the best known artist from the Orpheus group is Robert Delaunay, and we're going to look at him a bit more closely, right, than the others. Robert Delaunay. When we talk about Orpheus and we never read about it, they'll talk about him. He's the one, right? His color is the brightest of any of them. He's the one who's most totally committed to making a sort of metaphysical art. And for this reason, he's also one of the artists who most early on adopts complete abstraction, stops representing with his works. And in fact, he'd already done that by the time he did this picture in 1914. By 1912 or so, he comes up with pictures that do not have any reference to representation at all. Non-representational art. There's always an argument over who's first. It doesn't matter. A ton of people start doing it right around 1911, and Delaunay is one of them. And for him, it's color. Pure color. He writes a treatise about this. And he bases it on sort of scientific approaches to light. And he says that light obliterates everything. And light is color. We all know this, right? Spectrums. Yeah? Prisms. We know what light, the color of dark side of the moon. We all know what light is, right? Light passes these fragments into the color range. In this case, you can see that the colors that swirl around them have no representational value whatsoever. And they obliterate the physical forms. The woman on the right in this sort of dance is the man on the left. But parts of their forms are utterly wiped out by these shots of bright, pure color. Again, laid down with this sort of graphic precision, although it's a little mucky in its precision in this one. Like our other Orpheus, he's painting sound. These colors that we see, while they don't represent anything physical that we can see, what they do represent is sound, which is interesting, right? Just think about that for a second. It's not my notes. It just kind of came to me, right? The physical world, the things that people normally paint, right? Still life, figure, right? Landscape. These are things that are part of our world that we sense. And we paint them. We draw them. Sound is part of what we sense as well. So you as an artist who are interested in representing human experience are very limited if you only paint the things you see. And it opens up an entirely new avenue when you paint the things that you can't see. And for the Orpheus, we're interested in sort of finding metaphysical harmony, then that part of our experience that isn't tangible, you can't touch it, right? You can't reach out and grab sound. Those elements become a wonderful Orpheus door to the afterworld, like his music opens the door, right? In this case, the composition is built around sound. It was based on the cover of a magazine or a newspaper about this is the wife of the French finance. We're down my notes for this to get it right. The wife of the French finance minister got mad at the editor of the newspaper Le Figaro, the daily newspaper in Paris, right? Got mad at him because he was writing editorials against her husband's tax policies. So she shot him. And this lithograph of the event makes the front page of other journals, and that becomes the basis for Delaunay's composition, where the sound of the gun is the source of the color. It explodes outward. And so now this thing that you can't see, how does this guy do it? Our lithographer working for the newspaper? He gives us a puff of smoke, right? Easy peasy. You can touch that. You can see it, right? Delaunay turns it into this blast of color, these concentric rings of color, that turn this thing into almost a dance. But he's painting sound. I want to show you a couple details because I've seen this for a long time just in reproduction that I've only had to see live. I think it's out as we speak. It's collage as well. So his body's a cutout, right? And I think part of his face is a cutout as well, right? Or at least the entire face. So it's been collage, and that makes his attempt to use color to obliterate objects even stronger, because the color obliterates parts of the cutout as well. And you can see that at the heart of the explosion, right? The point where the gun tip would be is also done in cutouts, in collages, right? But collage pieces of color. Right? So again, the Orphists are trying to paint things you can't see. And what they're hoping is that their paintings will lead you to think about things that aren't part of the physical world, but are this metaphysical harmony that lies beyond that. Right? You can think about things we don't see in two different ways. There's the things we don't see that are part of our world, and there are things that we don't see that are part of another world. And the Orphists are linking those things. Lastly, one last thing I think I will bring up, and then we'll finish this up on Tuesday. This is exactly the same time as radio was beginning to become everywhere, right? People are exploring X-rays at this time. So we're becoming aware of things that seem physical but aren't. Electricity is relatively new at this time. Think about how much this must, like for us, the internet, right? We got the matrix because of the internet. Because of this idea that there's a world out there, the World Wide Web, that exists apart from our physical experience. Well, electricity and radio, right? Waves that you can't see but can carry music, voice, the presence of somebody to a very far off place, right? That is sort of a mind-breaking thing for people at the beginning of the 20th century, and was a sign for them that this metaphysical world actually did exist, that there's something else out there yet to be discovered. So as we're looking at these artists trying to evoke a world that's not the world we see, there's a lot going on behind that around the time that they're working. Okay, we'll look at more Delaunay on Tuesday. We'll go over some research tips on Tuesday for your next step of the research paper. And remember that on Tuesday, your revisions of the Q paper are due. I will get those back to you very soon, sometime in the next day. So high on my list, I got meetings for